Welcome to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast, brought to you by the Wealthy Speaker School. This is the podcast dedicated to people who want to speak more as a way to build their income and grow their business. Hey, welcome everyone to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. I'm your host, Jane Atkinson, and I'm excited to have the one and only Grant Baldwin on the show with us today. Welcome, Grant.
Thank you, Miss Jane. I appreciate you letting me hang out with you.
Hey, I'm so excited. You know, we've been on each other's shows before, and I have to tell you, the episode that we did jointly is still one of our highest rated. I think we really provided a lot of value that day, and I hope that we'll do the same today.
Cool. Let's do this more often.
Yes. So we're going to break today's podcast down into kind of three chunks. One will be it's a bit of a time right now. I'm not exactly sure when this will air, but we're going to talk about how to recession-proof your business, or, what's going on. We'll talk about how to embrace the art of speaking. That's the stagecraft, and also the business and how to build it. But before we start that, Grant, go ahead and tell us about your kind of current business model and who you speak to.
Yeah. So if we go back in time a little bit, I was a full-time speaker for several years. I was doing 60, 70 gigs a year. I did a lot in the education space, a lot with high schools and colleges, a lot with parents and teachers, and then started doing more with corporations and entrepreneurs. And then I had a bunch of people who were asking me like, hey, I want to be a speaker. How would I go about doing that? And I found that at the time, like I think you were one of the only people, you were one of the originals, one of the OGs who was really teaching. You've been in the game for a long time.
This is on video, by the way, everybody, so you can watch us on YouTube later on.
You got to go see the actual video of her reaction. There was much more than the sounds. So we started doing some teaching around that, and then that side of the business has really taken off. So that's the core of what we do today. So I still do a few speaking gigs a year, but not nearly as much as I used to. And I probably similar to you, like I enjoy speaking. Speaking is still a lot of fun. And I know that there's a lot of people who teach, especially on the art side of it. I know we'll talk some about that today, but I love the business side of but how do you actually book gigs? And that's the challenge that so many speakers run into. And, I know that you and I built some good systems around that. And so it's a lot of fun to be able to teach today.
That's great. So when it comes to right now, we're recording this about mid-March. And so there's chaos all around us. This will probably play in a couple of weeks. There's chaos all around us right now, but you're no longer in the throes of getting call after call after call of postponement or potentially canceled engagements right now. That's probably what's happening may not be affecting you to the degree that it might have a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I would say a couple of years ago, it would have been dramatically different. I mean, there were several, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, there's several friends that I know that I speak, 50, 60, 70 times a year, and just texting with them just to kind of check in. And several of them saying, there's a friend I was talking to last night who said like everything for the foreseeable future is canceled, and for a lot of speakers this time of year, at the time of this recording, March, April, it's busy conference time. Yeah. So it's not, and for a lot of them who especially do things through bureaus where they're not getting a deposit. The bureau is keeping the deposit until the event actually happens.
Oh, yes. I hadn't even thought about those people who really have the primary chunk of business is with bureaus. They're not even having that cash flow.
Yeah. So like you're saying, when I was speaking full time, I did a handful of gigs with bureaus, but not many. And so you were still collecting typically 50% deposits. And so even on slow periods, you still had a little bit of cash coming in. And so if you're going through bureaus, typically you get paid in full after the gig, and the bureau keeps the deposit until the gig actually happens. So it's definitely created a lot of stress and strain. In fact, and it's crazy how fast things are moving, So we were recording this on a Monday. This past Friday, I have a couple gigs in about a month and a half away, and I emailed both of them this past Friday, and they both said, yep, we're good to go. And even now, a couple days later after the weekend, I'm like, there's no way these events are going to happen.
They're not going to happen. No, they're not. Our prime minister was just on the television right before I hopped on this with you, and he is shutting her down. Our entire country is being on lockdown, and we're all advised to stay in the house for 14 days. And so they were saying in your country meetings up to 50, but I bet any money, all meetings will be canceled. So
yeah, and even like up to 50, a lot of them, they're going to be under 50 are still going to be precautionary and say, nope, it's not worth the risk. We had some of our leadership team that was scheduled to come to Nashville next week for a meeting. I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, we can't risk that right now. So,
and travel is going to become a problem.
Yeah,
that's really, it's just not, I would say we're on lockdown. Mm-hmm. And so we have to look at the calendar, and the only blessing, if we can see it here, is that typically July and August were not as crazy busy months for most people.
Yep.
And so if we can kind of get things under control, then maybe we can recoup and get the fall back.
Yeah.
And let's just talk about, and I've got a couple of other podcasts that I just did on this. I have a graphic that I'm going to be putting out of 10 ideas for recession proofing. We'll put that in the show notes. Let's just talk about what your advice might be to your speaker friend who texts you and says, it's bleak, dude, it is bleak. Yeah. Let's talk about it from a mindset standpoint, but also just from what could you do to hunker down from a business standpoint?
Yeah. So there's two things that we've been telling. In fact, last week I shot a video for our team, just kind of walking through, here's what we are going to be doing. Here's what you need to be thinking about.
Yes.
So the two big things we talked about, this is relevant for all speakers, is to take precautions and to take advantage. And when I say take precautions, like what are some of the practical things we can do, in terms of, self-quarantining ourselves and the social distancing stuff, and some of just the practical things that we need to be doing. Also opportunities for all of us to look personally and professionally at our businesses, making sure we have enough cash on hand, eliminating any excess expenses that we don't really need. It's nice to have, but not must have. And just kind of looking at the big picture here and making sure like, okay, we got to just take some precautions here, make sure we're in a good spot. And then on the other side of the equation, and when I say take advantage, I don't mean like exploiting people. In fact, this morning we were talking about some different things we can be doing within the business, not to like, hey, how do we kick people when they're down? No, not at all. But
how can we serve in a time of need? Absolutely.
Very much so. Like there are huge opportunities that speakers have everywhere of event planners that are hurting and organizations that are worried. And so how do we step up and provide support and help and care and compassion? And also recognizing like some of the biggest transfers of wealth and throughout history have happened in moments of crisis. So how do we look at this rather than like, hey, okay, we're victims to this, versus as how do we do something about this? How do we look back and be like, that was oddly enough one of the best things that ever happened to our business in one way or another. So trying to just have an offense approach to it rather than just a defense of woe is me.
I love that. And I love the idea of looking for opportunity. And also, if you can afford to do it, do what you can to keep the economy going. I feel like it's us opportunists who might be able to help things come back. And, the people who are investing in the stock market right now are going to be in great shape. And that may not be everybody that that is listening here today. But if you are able to do that, I think that's a beautiful place to be. Let's talk about, when you say precautions, how many months of, let's say, revenue, not really necessarily revenue, but how many months of cash flow do you think that a speaker should have in the coffers? I call it the comfort fund, in their comfort fund, in order to feel like, okay. Yeah. I'm thinking 6 anyway. Yeah. 6 is probably the minimum now, and maybe 12 might be. I know people who have 3 years, but obviously for people who are starting from scratch, let's be realistic.
Yeah. I mean, I think that at the bare minimum, a month, would be great. It's certainly better than nothing, and I think ideally anywhere from 3 to 6 months is going to be ideal. But also recognizing, for a lot, some of this depends on how your business is kind of diversified, so we both know a lot of speakers who 100% of their revenue is tied to them getting on a plane, going to an event, standing on a stage, delivering a talk. And that's just not happening anywhere right now. Yeah. So it's going to much more dramatically affect them versus someone who's like, I talked with someone else this morning who said, speaking is like 5-10% of my business. So I'm feeling it, even myself, like I got a couple of events that those both will both will probably be canceled or postponed or rescheduled.
Right.
So you feel it a touch, but not nearly to the degree if that was
Sure.
all of your business. So some of it kind of depends on, what your business model is there. And the
Right.
reality is, if it's not, if you said, well, speaking is only a small percentage, well, whatever the big percentage is, that could certainly be affected too in a different way. And
right, because when a recession comes, lots of people tighten their belts in lots of different ways. I kind of feel like you and I are in a good position from the fact that when when this type of thing happens, people who are able to afford us, they have some time on their hands and they may want to go to work on their business and all the things that they've been putting off for a while. They may decide to go ahead and start doing. So if they can be fearless about it, I think that's a good opportunity. I was talking to my friend Jared Bro, who is out of New Orleans, and he actually had a time in his life when he couldn't work for 6 months due to, if he went out, if he traveled, he could die. He had a really serious medical issue. And I just think that he started to revisit his business and the model right from then. And I think that this time is also going to have a lot of people just revisiting the business model. How can I diversify? How can I stop trading my time for money? This is something that you've gone before them and done so brilliantly.
Yeah, it's such a unique and fascinating time. Like I understand that there's a lot of nerves and fear and anxiety and that sort of thing. And I'm sure, you and I both feel a level of that as well. But the reality is like you mentioned that speaker friend, that there's a speaker friend that I remember a couple of years ago who I think had a routine doctor's appointment. It turned out he had a brain tumor, a brain aneurysm or something, and had to have an emergency surgery and couldn't travel for several months. And just same type of thing. His revenue as a speaker went from a bunch to nothing, just like that. So I think when those type of things happen, I think a lot of times we always assume, well, that wouldn't happen to me. I'm healthy. I'm good. Da, 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 da. And so the unique thing right now is this is affecting everyone. Like there's not a speaker, anyone in the speaking industry who is not being impacted. I was talking with a friend of mine who's works at a major bureau, and he said we've had 350, 400 events canceled or rescheduled like within the past week or so. So just like the trickle down effect is massive.
It really is. Bureaus are starting to lay off people, and that's a really scary thing to hear that happen. And what that makes me think about is it's far worse, far more far-reaching than 9/11.
Yeah.
You were probably around for that, and I know that it's I know that it's different.
Well, and to piggyback on that, I think one of the things that I think hopefully gives speakers everywhere encouragement and hope is that the speaking industry is something that has been around for generations and many, many, many decades, and will continue to be around long after this. So, in the scheme of things, this is a big deal. We all understand that, but years and years and years and decades from now, the speaking industry will still exist. It will come back just as strong, if not better, than it was before. We've been through this. We'll go through it again. And so the speakers who make it through this, I remember when I went through was it like the 2008 recession or so, feeling like if I can get through this, I can make it in any industry. I can make it in any market, right?
That's the call. Like it's not a very nice word to say, but that's when the strong are able to say, okay, this is definitely, I'm in this for the long haul. And I think you're right. When we look back 10 years from now, this will just be a little blip on our graph. One of the things that my really smart, I call him the great calmer downer, Andy Bush, he is an economist, and he says that what he thinks will come out of this is smaller events, smaller meetings with smaller numbers of people. And if that's the case, then that's actually good news, because it'll probably be more events.
Yes.
So, a big company will still gather 5,000 people, but they're going to do it in 10 meetings of 500 instead, or something like that.
Yeah, I agree that I think there's a lot of like small, there's a speaker I was talking to this morning who said, I do a couple of big events, but then I have several of these small events, like trainings that are 20 people, that are really good corporate training opportunities. Those are logistically, those are a lot simpler to do via Zoom, to reschedule, to have a lot more flexibility versus, if you have a 5,000 person conference, the logistics that go into changing that are just a massive amount of work. So certainly opportunities on the small side.
For sure. Okay, so let's talk about kind of moving. Let's give a few tips on, and I know there's a lot of this going on out there, so we're not going to go on about it for too long. But let's talk about moving to an approach where you're saying to your clients, "Okay, I'm here to serve. You're hurting. We're hurting. What can I do to serve?" In the meantime, while we're waiting for this date to rebook, why don't I go ahead and bring you some content while we're waiting? Let's do it via Zoom. Let's do it virtually. What are some things that maybe you and I might know that we might take for granted
Yeah.
in terms of setting up a remote event?
Yeah. So one tip I would give would be that there's absolutely going to be events that happen right now, or events that have been canceled or postponed or rescheduled. And so figuring out the things that you do right now can have massive, massive implications, both positive and negative, with the relationship of that event planner for years and years to come.
Right.
And as speakers, we are in the relationship business. And so let me give you a quick example. A couple of years ago, I was supposed to speak in an event, and like the week before the event planner calls and says that they were going to have to cancel the event. Registration wasn't what they had hoped, and they just couldn't go forward with the event. Now, I was speaking at their event in the middle of kind of a swing of 3 different events, and so flights were already booked, and so I was going to end up having to go to their city anyway. So I told them, I was like, I have to come through there anyway. Logistically, it didn't make sense for me to fly home in between these other 2 events. And so I said, I'm going to be there anyway. What can I speak at something? What can I do that's a win for you?
How can I serve you?
Totally. And so we went to lunch. She set up a speaking thing. I said, I'll just do it pro bono. I'm already going to be there. And so long story short, a couple years later, she was kind of at that time, she was in like a state director role. She eventually was the national director. And her first year as national director, she had me come and do the opening keynote for their big conference. And I like to think it had something to do with, hey, I was hurting in this time, and you helped me out, and I'm going to remember that long down the road.
Yes,
so thinking through as speakers, what can we do to serve our clients and help our clients? Because those things that we do right now have massive implications and ramifications for years and years to come.
I like that. Not only that, it takes you out of the woe is me mindset that is, oh, what, you're canceling on me?
Yep.
No. And you say, oh, wow, I bet you're really hurting right now. That sucks. How can I be of service? What can I do in the meantime? And that's good karma that's going to just come back to you. And I think that actually there's an opportunity, Grant, for you to go back to every client that you've ever spoken for in the last 5 years and just ask the question, hey, how you doing?
Yep.
Can I, what's going on at your end? You must be going through a difficult time. It may not be with the other end of, hey, I've got, I'd love to come and give you my speech.
Yep.
It might be just, hey, how you doing?
Yep.
And I think that that's something that people will appreciate as well.
Yeah, totally. Because it's kind of, again, the unique thing here is like before we started recording, I live in Nashville. And at the time of this recording, a couple of weeks ago, we had a big tornado come through. And I live about half hour away, so it didn't personally affect me. But it's one of those things like, okay, I could reach out to people in Nashville specifically on this one specific situation that happened. But what's happening right now with this virus affects every event planner, every speaker. Like there's no one that's immune right now. So being able to just to reach out and check in on people is a great, great move.
Yeah. I don't know. I just recorded 3 podcasts in a row, so I have a feeling I may repeat myself on something here. Right now, our entire country is getting shut down, and everybody's being told to stay home for 14 days. So I have a hashtag that I want to get started. It's hashtag productive quarantine.
There you go.
How are you going to make the most of this time? How are you going to look for opportunity to retool your business during a time like this? I think there's no better time to do that, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like what Michael Gerber talks about in E-Myth, the difference between working in the business versus on the business. And as speakers, like oftentimes we're just like trying to get the next gig, trying to get, we're just kind of, at times we can be on this hamster wheel.
Yes.
So this is a forced quarantine for everyone to like, okay, you're not getting on a plane in the next couple of weeks. So what are you going to do with this time to make good use of it to help build the business when things come back?
Exactly, exactly. And I know you and I will be just as busy as we always are because we're coaching and doing things like that. There's a lot of speakers that would be really good coaches. And if that's something that you're thinking about, just go out and get some training and do some things that can allow you to start offering that as one of the pieces of your service. Okay. Do you feel like we've covered everything when it comes to kind of recession proofing yourself?
Ready or not, it's here. So
Okay.
yeah, or it's again, I think again, people can look at this as a very negative thing. Woe is me. And again, this is not to make light of it. It's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
But at the same time, recognizing there's a lot of things that we just cannot control. You just cannot control, the decisions that, government officials may be making on events or event planners, what they're saying, or the travel restrictions or the quarantines and that sort of thing. And it's just a weird, unique, unprecedented, uncharted territory that we're in. But let's make the best of it and roll with it and figure it out. We'll come out the other side.
Yeah. And I think mindset is going to have a huge, I'm feeling very fortunate right now. I've been studying mindset for about the last year. I used to think it was like a small percentage to do with your success. And now I think it's everything.
Yep.
100% of your success is dependent on your mindset. And I'm feeling very grateful that I have done that study. I feel like it prepared me for now in a really amazing way. Okay. So obviously, if you're out speaking 50, 60, 70, 80 times a year, you've got some mad platform skills, sir. So I know you don't call yourself a platform guy or anything like that, but you have some skills, probably things that you do that you don't even, recognize yourself for. But you've probably developed some things that are important that a lot of speakers may be less conscious of. What are you consciously aware of when you step onto a stage?
One thing I feel like I do okay at is I really enjoy using humor. I think humor can be a really differentiating factor. A lot of speakers, audience members, when they're going to hear a speaker, we assume they're going to be boring. We assume they're going to be dull. We assume it's going to be repetitive, monotonous, tedious, that sort of thing. So any type of humor that you can inject can really break it up and be like, okay, well, if I gotta be here, like at least this guy's somewhat interesting or somewhat entertaining. And so, because the reality is also understanding there's a big difference between audience members that want to be there versus audience members that have to be there. And so if they have to be there, then they're like, it doesn't matter where you're going to go with this talk, I'm tuned out. So you got to earn their trust. You have to get them on your side. And even for most people who are watching, listen to this, a lot of our peers, colleagues, most of us don't have the luxury of people are going to an event specifically because we're there.
Right.
They are going to an event and we happen to be there as the speaker, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to build that rapport. You have to build that trust with the audience. And so humor is one way to go about doing that.
That's really good. And the old joke is only be funny if you want to get paid.
This is true.
But I also want to bring up something that you just alluded to, which is understanding that it actually isn't about you.
Yeah.
Even though you're the one that's on stage, again, you should really be there with the stance of being there to serve that audience, and how do you make it about that audience? Would you say that you learned that over time in your business and in your stagecraft, that when you had an idea, you had to figure out how to make it about them and bring them into the idea, maybe make the audience the hero of your stories, that type of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the audience, when speakers come to us, you and I both, and say, "Hey, I have a cool story," or I climbed Mount Everest, or I won a gold medal, or I did some crazy thing. I was a war hero. It's like I should be a speaker. It's like, not necessarily. If you share that with the audience, that's great. But the audience doesn't care. They want to know, what's in it for me? So for months from now, there's going to be people who are going to try to become speakers. I had the coronavirus. I should be hired as a speaker. It's like, nobody cares that you had it, right?
Yeah, you
Plenty of
and
other people that have
thousands
had
of
it.
others. Yes.
Yeah. So just because, you've experienced something or accomplished something or overcame something, it doesn't necessarily mean that the audience cares. They want to know what's in it for me. And I think I think this is something that we talk a lot about, but sometimes you don't necessarily get until you're up on stage, you're speaking regularly, and it's like, oh, okay, I tell the story about me and nobody pays attention, but I flip it and I tell it more so it's relevant and relatable to them. And now all of a sudden people are tracking, So some of this is you don't know until it's like trying to explain how do you ride a bike. Like at some point you hop on the bike and you kind of figure it out as you go.
Yeah, for sure. Do you remember Art Berg?
The name sounds vaguely
He
familiar.
might have been a little before your time, but when I started in the industry, Art Berg and my boss at the time, Vince Pacenti, were kind of going along, and they were coming onto the scene as big time speakers at the same time. But then all of a sudden, Art Berg's business just shot through the roof. And he was in a wheelchair. He was, I believe, quadriplegic. I don't want to get that wrong. And so I cornered him one day and said, it was easy to do because he was in a wheelchair. I cornered him and said, Art, what have you been doing? Your business has just skyrocketed at. And he said, I figured out a way to make it about them.
Yeah.
And so this was his whole story about how he became a quadriplegic and how he persevered. And he had this great poster, while the difficult takes time, the impossible just takes a little longer. And he was just such a beacon. He's passed away since, and I just really a big loss for the world. But I really took that in. I figured out a way to make it about them, even though it was his story, which you would think would be totally logically to be all about him. He had to figure out how to translate his moments to their needs, which was, everybody has to overcome something in their life.
Right. And the way he kind of described that was as something over time, I figured this thing out. Right. Yeah. So it wasn't like I did my first gig and it just clicked, every speaker, we're all figuring it out as we go. And sometimes you're going to give a talk and you're like, okay, that worked. And that did not work. So I'm not doing that again. Right. And you're figuring it out as you go.
Yeah. One of the things that we did down in Phoenix, I just ran my own live event, and we have Kelly Swanson come in year after year to do hot seats and coach people. And she's just an absolute genius at that. But makes it so much easier when you can watch other people. You can really learn from them. But one of the ideas was to watch yourself with the sound off.
Yeah.
And watch yourself with sound only. And there's different ways that you can review the game tapes in order to improve. And if you're at all worried about your movements on stage, watch it with the sound off. And I think that'll be a big indicator of where you might need to improve as well.
Yeah, because it's a bunch of little things that's really hard to quantify in a time of well, if you just tell more stories, you're just a better speaker, or just be funnier and you're good. It's not like that, so it's kind of like, it's like going to Disney. What makes Disney magical? What makes Disney great? It's not like, well, I go because they have great hamburgers. You can't point to one thing. It's 1,000 little tiny things that you don't really think about or process until after the fact. It's like, oh, they did this and that was really cool. And then they did this and that was really interesting. And same thing for a speaker. It's like you see an amazing speaker and it's hard to I don't know, they were just really, really good. And it was 1,000 little things that they did really, really well.
Yeah, and I would say one of the shifts is getting intentional about it.
Yeah.
Okay, be intentional about how you move. Be intentional about your voice. Be intentional about weaving humor throughout it. And that then becomes the layers of the craft.
Yes.
And now we have a crafted speech rather than, I get on stage and I'm good, but I'm not really sure why I'm good, to I now have crafted this presentation and it's very consciously good. I love that.
Yeah.
I know that people are probably like, come on, you guys, tell me how to get more bookings. That's what they really want to hear from you and I, right? So let's talk about the speaking business that you built from the ground up. Would you agree that it's a numbers game?
100%. Yeah, totally. Because let's go back to what we just kind of touched on. Like again, people assume that you have to have certain pre-qualifications in order to be a speaker. You have to have accomplished these certain things, have some crazy life story. I am a white male from the Midwest who's had a very normal, average life.
Right.
Like on paper, there is nothing that qualifies me as a speaker, right? And so
you were probably young when you first started out, though. How old were you when you hit the circuit?
Yeah, I mean, I was probably, let's see, I would have been early 20s.
Yeah, so that's actually hard to do.
It is, absolutely, because actually for a minute, I worked for a seminar company and what was it, National Seminars out of Kansas City, and doing some seminars. And I was like usually the youngest one in the room. And I'm just like, what am I doing here? But it was not bad. It was practice. It was a rep,
Right. Did you go up through the youth market first and then expand into corporate?
Well, I did the seminar thing, was like as I was trying to book my own things, the seminar thing was one of the first things I did that was just like, all right, I know this is not what I want to do long term, but this is practice. And if I got to do something to make a dollar just to pay the bills, I'd rather be speaking. And so if that means I got to put on a suit and speak at these all day seminars that were just brutal.
That's a grind. That's a grind. Very. Anybody who comes into my world with that, I call them, those are my road warriors.
Yes.
And they know what's what, and they know how to sell, because you have to know how to sell to survive in the seminar business. So for anybody who may be wanting to get that kind of experience, go talk to Fred Pryor or the seminar companies, and you have to audition for them typically, and you can get paid. What we maybe just starting out might feel like a pretty good fee, but then later on it's going to feel bad.
It felt bad pretty quickly.
$2,500, sometimes $30.
Not because if I remember correctly, they were. Oh, and this was, again, 13, 14
maybe like
years ago.
15's at the top end of the scale. I can't remember. It was like, I haven't touched it.
I want to say like $250, $300 per day.
Ooh, okay.
So 5 days and you might make, 1,500, and that's 5 cities, 5 days, all day seminars. It was,
well, a few of my clients have come out of it, and I think it's a little bit better than that, but it's still not good in terms of, they kind of use you up and then spit you out, I think is kind of how I look at it.
Some of the best advice I got was I had a great trainer with National, and day one, he told me the best thing you can do is already be thinking about your exit strategy. If you're serious about being a speaker, it's not here. And he was very candid about that and very kind about it. And just said and so I think I did it for 5-6 months or something. And at that point, again, it was just buying myself time to book my own gigs. And like you said, it was a numbers game and a momentum game. And at that point, I'd booked enough that I was like, okay, I can do a full week of seminars, or I can do one hour talk. And make the
exactly.
Same.
Yeah. That becomes a bit crazy. Okay, so you went straight into corporate in your 20s?
No, so the bulk of what I was doing in my 20s was still in the education space. So a lot of student leadership events, a lot of school assemblies, a lot of college events, college orientations, some stuff with teachers and parents, but a lot with students.
Now, education also uses you up pretty good, because when you go into a town, you'll do a student assembly, but then you'll also do the parent teachers, and then you might do the administration, and on and on. Like, they will build as much business in there as you can, and the fees are also kind of, so this is interesting. Fred Pryor is kind of the lowest pay scale. Then you get better and you go into education, which is a little bit better, but still they use you up pretty good too. I would say my education clients are really happy once they get to corporate, because then it's like, what? I can get $5,000 and only do one engagement? Wow, this is brilliant. Right.
And it really depends on the types of events and kind of what your business model is, because I knew some speakers who were like, it's a volume game, meaning that I want to do a ton of assemblies for a low dollar amount and the math works out, versus there are absolutely conferences that pay, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 in the education space. And you have to be a solid speaker and you have to be good. The thing I always really liked about the education space was that, there were so many corporate speakers I knew who said, I've done some education stuff. I've done some corporate stuff. Education is a really tough audience. And so if you wanted to make it in the education space, doing a school assembly for 1,500 teenagers who didn't want to be there, you had to be a really good speaker. And so I like the challenge of that, of like, you got us out of math class. I don't care what you have to say, speaker boy. And so you had to work really, really hard.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun, but it was and PA systems and microphone systems that were hit and miss and kind of coming and going, and just like, good golly. So
it's bad.
It makes you a better speaker. I really, really enjoyed speaking in that world.
That's great. You probably ran across Josh Shipp, who I think has probably been at the top end of the market around 7,500, but maybe he's gone beyond that by now. But anyway, so there is money out there in education, but it is a bit of a grind. And I love that you were just like, yes, I'm up for this task. Yeah. And so then you transition over to corporate, and do you feel like this is just the cushy life? This is just, I've made it. Like, oh, there's a guy with a sign waiting for me at the bottom of the escalator. How sweet is that?
It's not too bad. But again, like the bulk of what I do today is more, similar to you, more on the training side. And again, I think that kind of goes back to beginning with the end in mind of what's the business you want. I remember someone told me early on in my speaking career, like, speaking is a very high paying manual labor job, in that you do get paid really well to stand on stage and run your mouth. But again, the nature of it is you have to leave your family, you have to go somewhere, and you have to be there. Versus now, I think you and I are, our businesses may have a slight effect, but not nearly as much as other speakers may have, and people in the industry. So to me, I feel incredibly grateful. I know our business has grown to a point that I would not be able to do what I've been able to do to help the amount of people I've had, to create the revenue that we've had, if I was purely speaking on my own. So it's definitely like a different business model, but it's worked for us. Okay.
So it is a numbers game. That was the beginning of that conversation. Rabbit, squirrel hole. We went down it. Let's talk about what you have seen back speaking, what you talk to your clients about today that has worked really well in terms of marketing.
Yeah. So one of the best things that still works today is continuing to reach out to people proactively. And so you can certainly, I got my website, I got my demo video, and now I just sit back and I wait for the phone to ring. And that just doesn't work,
What? It doesn't?
Not just because you have a website, just because you have a video, nobody cares. Your mom is thrilled. She's going to tell both of her friends. Nobody else cares. And so you've got it. Like we were kind of touching on, like, speaking is very much a momentum business. If you're doing 50, 60, 70 gigs a year, it's a lot easier to continue to book gigs because there's so much ancillary business and spin-off business and repeat and referral and word of mouth that just organically happens. That's hard to reverse engineer. It's hard to quantify, but it absolutely happens. And so reaching out and letting people know that this is something that you offer, that this is something that you do. And this is why it's so important for you to get really, really clear on who you speak to and what is the problem that you solve, versus saying, I just speak to humans about whatever you want me to talk about. What do you want me to talk about? I can talk about that. Like, nobody's looking for that speaker. They're looking for a speaker who speaks to a specific person on a specific problem. And the more clear you are on that, then the easier it is to actually find events that you would be a good fit for. Like, you're not pestering them to hire you to solve some problem that they don't have. They are looking for a speaker like you. You're just showing them why you are a good fit. So being proactive and actually engaging and reaching out and following up makes a huge, huge difference to get the ball rolling for you.
Right. And so we talk about it, I think I'm using Ed Tate's term here, and in terms of what's your superpower. Some people are really amazing at sending that email and getting somebody to respond and kind of moving through the process via email. Some people are great at the phone. Some people are great on LinkedIn or hooking people in through Instagram. There's lots of different ways to do this. What is your kind of primary way? And then from there.
Yeah, you're exactly right that there are a lot of ways. It reminds me, a couple of years ago, I was interested in real estate investing, and I was talking to a friend who's a real estate investor and has invested in all different types of things. And so I said, okay, you have single family homes, you have multifamily, you have apartments and commercial properties and yada, 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 on and on the list goes. And I remember asking him, which one is best? And he goes, Yes. They all work, right? But what doesn't work is trying to do them all. So I've actually heard from several people who have done a lot, have seen serious success lately with LinkedIn. I've never really used LinkedIn. I don't have really any experience with LinkedIn. And I've also heard from speakers who've had a lot of success using Facebook ads. We do a lot of Facebook ads, but not necessarily for booking gigs.
Speaking,
yeah. So the thing that I think still works is the goal is to always get someone on the phone, right? I don't know. I've probably had a couple, but it's pretty rare. You email someone and they're like, "Yeah, we were looking for a speaker like you, so let's book it." Like you have to talk to them. Business happens over the phone. Again, it's a relationship business.
Yeah, and your goal is to go to the next step to help build that relationship. And I think, being in that, we're kind of a crazy economy right now. That's actually where you want to be living right now, is in that relationship building space. If you reach out to someone on LinkedIn, it's not, "Hey, you should book me, I'm a speaker." It's, "Hey, wow, I've seen your industry. Things are kind of hard right now. How are you doing? How are you making out?" Like just inquiring after people's well-being. And then they might say, "Well, tell me more about what you do, and let's hop on the phone together." And it might lead to something.
Yeah, the goal, anytime you're reaching out, whether that's LinkedIn or Instagram or email or whatever it is, the goal is to always start a conversation and get them to reply. Give them a reason to reply. So one mistake I see some speakers make with their emails is they'll send an email and it's like a 98 paragraph email about—
They do the show up and throw up.
Yes. Here's why I'm so great. Here's why I'm so amazing. If you ever need a speaker, let me know. Well, one, it's ridiculously long. It's all about you. Nobody's ever going to read that. And two, there's nothing to reply to. There's nothing to respond to. So I always like to ask like a really simple
one good question.
That gives them something to reply to versus, it's like if someone asks either of us, "Hey, how do I become a speaker?" That's a big question. There's a lot to go into versus if someone asks like a very targeted, specific thing that's easy for us to reply to, I'm a lot more likely to send a quick reply. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to start a conversation.
That's good. That's really good. And I like the idea of a question being, do your people care about resilience or something, that just kind of leaves them to go, "Well, actually, yes, we do care about resilience. And now is a good time to be talking about that," or whatever it might be. What's a question that you like to offer up?
Yeah, one question I use a lot is, "Do you mind me asking when you'll start reviewing speakers for XYZ event?" So not just some event that you have in the future, but I've done the research and I figured out you have your regional conference is happening in October.
Yes.
And so I was curious when you'll start reviewing speakers for that. Because it's easy for them to say, "We just hired speakers, not yet, in a couple weeks," whatever. It's like a couple words they can reply
Your goal is for them to be able to get your email out of their in basket and over to somewhere else. And if they can respond with a very quick, finite answer, like, "We'll be doing that in November," then they're like happy. And you're happy because now you know November. And one little David Averin tip that we had over in the Wealthy Speakers School is to put the subject line of their conference in the subject line, because that's something that they can't just delete.
Yes. Yep.
Even though they may want to, they can't delete it if it's got their name of their conference. What's the best money you have ever spent on something in your business?
Good question. Good question. So I would say an assistant early on who helped with a lot of like the logistics and details. So I continued for many, many years to always still handle the sales part. Like she would handle some of the screening, just to kind of figure out if this is legit or not. But if it was legit, like I knew no one could sell me better than me.
you.
So I wanted to talk to them because, again, for a couple of reasons. One, remember this is a relationship business, and so there are going to be different personal connections I can make with them that maybe a third party wouldn't be able to do. The other thing was that at the end of the day, I was the one that was going to have to show up and speak. So if they're like, "Hey, could you speak on this, or can you tweak this, or can you merge this talk with that talk, or do you have any case studies for this?" Like, I got to be the one that's going to deliver that. So I need to be like, "Oh yeah, actually, I just spoke at XYZ conference in your industry, and let me connect the dots for you in that way." So, but once I spoke to them, once they were booked, then I would pass the baton back. I'd say, "Hey, Lisa's going to take care of you from here. She would handle contracts and logistics and invoicing."
Logistics.
Yeah. Yes. I would not
Beautiful.
An ounce of energy thinking about it until a week or two before the event. We would have a pre-event call. But anything that they needed between point A and point B, she handled. And so it's just completely out of sight, out of mind for me.
I like hiring for that because I think, Grant, and you probably get this a lot, that speakers want to hire out the problem.
Yeah.
And the problem is that they're not getting enough sales. And
Yep.
so they hire to try to solve that problem. When in fact, if they just offloaded a lot of the stuff that would allow them to be freed up to do what they do best, which is selling. And I'm not saying that everybody is amazing at selling themselves, but if they're not, they should probably get to work in getting amazing at selling themselves, because nobody should be able to sell you better than you.
Yeah. And I know that if I'm speaking full time, nobody cares about my business more than me. Should care about my business more than me. Right.
Right.
Because to that point, for a little while, she was doing some of the logistic stuff. And I was like, I don't want to, like, most of us don't enjoy the selling. We just want to get on stage and speak. So I tried to pass that baton to her. And I noticed pretty quickly, like, our bookings were dropping. Not because she wasn't doing her job, or not that she was dropping the ball or she was bad. I just knew that I could do it better than anybody could do it. Right. For me, that's not for someone else, but for me, I could, because I was the one, like, it was my livelihood. It was me that was going out and delivering on it. So it was the thing that I'm the most passionate about. Like, when speakers, and I'm sure you get this too, speakers, especially early on, who come and say, how do I get an agent? How do I get a bureau? And we always say, if you can't book your own stuff, there is zero chance a bureau or an agent's going to do that.
They're really not interested in you until you don't need them anymore, which was one of the great ironies. But I like this hashtag focused hustle. And I would say that you are a great example, and have been in the business that you used to do and are in the current business that you do. And I think I am a great example of that as well. It's just about consistently putting it out there and consistently being in the right place when people need you to help you solve the problem.
Yep. Absolutely. And so I think an advantage that you and I have is, we could probably talk about this offline, but there are a lot of speakers and speaker programs that pop up on a daily, weekly, monthly basis.
Oh, yes. Let's do talk about that, because I would say that every Tom, Dick, and Harry is now a coach for speakers who's going to help people get to $1 million. And I'm just happy. This is why I kind of pull people in who are competition to me potentially. Sure. And we don't really look at each other that way, but I want to really showcase people who are legit, who are out there actually giving people information that is helpful. And because there is going to be more and more and more and more jumping on this bandwagon, especially right now. So we've got a lot of unemployed speakers right now for the next probably 4 to 6 months. What do you think they're going to be offering up? Programs for speakers. And so I think that that's something that you're bringing up that's a very, I guess what we need to say is buyer beware.
Sure. Well, and the other thing where I was going with that was like, it's one thing for someone to say like, hey, I've booked 6 gigs the past year. I'm going to teach this now. Versus like, Jane and I, we have been in this industry for a long time, have been on the stages, have the relationships, have the contacts, and have, even like right now, of being able to talk with people in the industry who are on the front lines, bureaus, agents, speakers, event planners, to get a sense of how people are doing, versus like, I spoke once and now I'm going to, put up my flag as an expert. It's like, come on.
Yeah. I hear you. Well, I have this little friend here. If you're listening to the podcast, there's this little bug that's just decided to hop on my laptop. So I thought I'd show him to you in the camera. Yeah, I don't know what he is, but I do get a lot of. This means that spring is around the corner. So that's good for us up here in Canada. Hope is on the way. He's my little hopeful bug. Well, Grant, feel like we've kind of covered our 3 areas. Is there anything that you feel really needs to be said to speakers at this time?
I think like one thing we touched on earlier is the speaking industry has been around for a long time. It will be around for a long time. There's absolutely a lot of nerves and anxiety and fear and uncertainty right now. But big picture, we're going to be fine. The industry is not going anywhere, and there's always going to be opportunities for speakers to share their message from the stage.
Yeah, I love that. And I do hope that we have provided you with a few tools that can allow you to weather the storm and move into a business that is one that will be profitable in the long term. Maybe this might be a bit of a shakeup for your business model, to be thinking about what else can I do to repurpose my content and my material so that I'm not quite so dependent on that trading time for money on the stage type of operation.
Yep. Yep. Very
So,
much so.
but please know that we're with you guys. And if you're watching out on YouTube and you have a question, ask us. Ask a question. And Grant's out there on social media. I'm out there on social media. We're ready. We're prepared to help serve in these times. So, thank you, Grant, for being on with us today. I really appreciate it.
Jane, anytime I get to see you, I'm happy. So thanks for letting me be here.
Thank you. And for those of you listening in, thanks for being with us today. And with that, we will say, see you soon, Wealthy Speakers. Bye for now, everyone. Hey, thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed our show, you'll want to come and visit us at the Wealthy Speaker School, where we provide a proven roadmap for building your dream business. Go to wealthyspeakerschool.com. And for show notes for today's podcast, head on over to speakerlauncher.com and click on podcast. I'll see you soon, Wealthy Speakers.